Hi, I'm John Stevenson. We're going to be looking at the testimony of Thomas in our continuing study of the life of Christ. John chapter 20 and verse 19. So when it was evening on that day, this is the day on which Jesus had risen from the dead. John's already talked about the appearance of Jesus to Mary Magdalene and how she went and told the disciples, and they weren't sure what to make of that. Notice this was the first day of the week when the doors were shut where the disciples were for fear of the Jews. Now, this tells me the mindset of the disciples. The key thing that is on their mind is that they could be next. After all, Jesus had been betrayed, he had been arrested, he had been tried and crucified. They could be next. There could be 11 more crosses waiting for them. And yet, in the middle of this, we see Jesus came and stood in their midst. Now, we're not told how that he did this. Notice the doors were shut, perhaps bolted, and yet Jesus comes in anyway. This sounds like it might be a miraculous occurrence. The fact that Jesus was alive was a miraculous occurrence, but suddenly he's in their midst and said to them, "Peace be with you." After all, they were probably scared out of their wits by this sudden appearing. Verse 20, and when he had said this, he showed them both his hands and his sides. Now, he does this as part of the identification. You say, well, why does he need an identification? I don't know what Jesus looked like. Remember, he had been beaten to a bloody mess. Had that all vanished? Were there scars? There were scars in his hands and side because he showed them to him. What about on his face and on the rest of his body? We simply don't know. The passage doesn't tell us. What we do see is that the disciples then rejoiced when they saw the Lord. They recognize it's him. It's not just a vision. It's not just a manifestation. It is him. Verse 21, so Jesus said to them again, peace be with you. And now he adds, as the Father has sent me, I also send you. He had been sent from God to the world, and he is now sending them to the world to continue his work, not his work of obtaining salvation. He had accomplished that work. He had said on the cross, it is finished. But now they're going to continue that work of taking that good news, the message of the gospel, to all the nations to make disciples. And when he had said this, he breathed on them and said to them, receive the Holy Spirit. Now, notice he breathed on them. We could translate this, he blew on them. And it reminds us of way back in the book of Genesis, how God did some blowing, how he made the first man, Genesis chapter 2, and he breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. And that man became a living soul. And in the same way, Jesus breathes on them, he blows upon them in order to bring about this life-giving spirit that will empower their life in their ministry. And so he says to them, receive the Holy Spirit. Now you say, wait a minute, isn't that going to take place in Acts chapter 2? I think it does take place in Acts chapter 2. Remember, there's a blowing, the sound of a mighty rushing wind that takes place, which means that I think perhaps this is promissory, that Jesus is blowing upon them, but they're not actually going to receive the Spirit until you get to Acts chapter 2, the day of Pentecost, when the Spirit shows up. Now, verse 23, if you forgive the sins of any, their sins have been forgiven. Now notice the tenses. If you forgive, that's what's called in the Greek tense an aorist tense, sort of a punctiliar, although it doesn't always have that idea. If you do this, if you forgive the sins of any, their sins, and I think the idea there, they will have been forgiven. In other words, the forgiveness isn't going to be what you do. The forgiveness will have already taken place from heaven itself. And notice, if you retain the sins of any, they have been retained. So that there is going to be a correspondence between what the apostles say and do and what is taking place in heaven. They are heavenly ambassadors sent with heavenly authority to speak that which has already taken place. Verse 24, now is the problem. But Thomas, one of the 12, and notice he's got a nickname. He's called Didymus. The word Didymus means twin. And actually, the word Thomas, I'm given to understand, means twin. It just means it in two different languages. But he wasn't with them when Jesus came. So here's Thomas. Thomas had actually he had a brother somewhere. Some people wonder was his brother one of the apostles. I don't know. We're not told that. He had a twin brother somewhere, but he wasn't there. And he had left his twin brother, presumably, if his twin brother was not one of the other apostles, he had left his twin brother to come and follow Jesus. But Thomas wasn't present when Jesus came. Now, I think this was probably just happenstance. Maybe Thomas was out doing a reconnoitering. Maybe he was checking to see if the Jews were sending out patrols after them. Or maybe he had just gone out to get hamburgers. We don't know why he wasn't there. We're told in John chapter 11, Thomas had been mentioned, and notice the same nickname is given. Therefore, Thomas, who was called Didymus, had said to his fellow disciples, and he had said this on the occasion where Jesus said, I'm going to Jerusalem. Now, Jerusalem had been the place where the authorities were after Jesus, where they were seeking to put him to death. And Thomas had said, well, let us also go so that we may die with him. And what's reflected in those earlier words of Thomas is that he had great loyalty, but perhaps not a lot of faith. He had the loyalty to follow Jesus, even following him to death. That's what he said. Let us also go that we may die with him. There's a cross in Jerusalem. There's a place of death in Jerusalem, and we're going to go there anyway because Thomas had thought, I'm following Jesus. But there wasn't a lot of faith involved. You see, he did not recognize that after the cross would come a resurrection. And so he wasn't there when this took place. Verse 25, so the other disciples were saying to him, we have seen the Lord. But he said to them, and notice his reply reflects that lack of faith. He said to them, unless I see in his hands the imprint of the nails, and put my finger into the place of the nails, and put my hand into his side, I will not believe. Thomas expresses the words of a skeptic. It's not that he doesn't want to believe, it's that he feels he can't believe because he feels it's not true. He can only believe something that is demonstrably true. He will not just believe on their say-so. Now, I want you to notice the nature of doubt, because I think Judas Iscariot reflected a certain kind of doubt. It was the doubt of disloyalty, where Judas Iscariot not only doubted, and I don't know what it was he believed, but he doubted Jesus, and he sold out Jesus. He betrayed Jesus. He was completely disloyal to Jesus. Thomas, by contrast, has the doubt of a skeptic. He's skeptical on this report that Jesus is alive. It's not that he doesn't want to see that Jesus is alive. He wants to see it. But that's the point. He won't believe unless he sees. His is the doubt of a skeptic. It's a doubt that has loyalty. I think Thomas is still loyal, but he doesn't believe because it's just, well, quite frankly, he finds the idea of a resurrection unbelievable. Even though he had seen Jesus raise others from the dead. But it's one thing to raise others. It's one thing to heal others. Can you raise yourself? Could it be? And in the mind of Thomas, that's just too much to believe. Verse 26, after 8 days, his disciples were again inside, same room, maybe the same reasons. I imagine, well, we're told the doors are still shut. But this time Thomas is there, and Thomas with them. Jesus came, the doors having been shut, and stood in their midst and said, peace be with you. For the other disciples, this is like deja vu. This is happening again. But Thomas had not been there on that previous occasion. And so he addresses Thomas. Then he said to Thomas, reach here with your finger and see my hands. And reach here with your hand and put it into my side. The scars, this is a week later, the scars, the marks of his crucifixion are still there. Um, can it be that even to this day, if you were to see Jesus in heaven, that the marks of his crucifixion would still be there? It's been noted that, and I think this is perhaps true, that the only man-made thing that will ever make it into heaven will be the marks that made it possible for us to enter heaven. And so he says here, reach your hand and put it into my side, and do not be unbelieving, but believing. He's telling Thomas to believe and giving him the sign that will lead to faith. And Thomas's response, verse 28, Thomas answered and said to him, my Lord and my God. Now, I don't think that Thomas is using the Lord's name in vain. He's not just saying the name of God as an explanation or as a exclamation. Rather, that he is saying this as a statement of faith. He's addressing Jesus. Notice, he said to him, he's calling Jesus, my Lord and my God. Thomas's faith went from 0 to 100% immediately as he's seen Jesus. His loyalty was already there, but now he has faith to match that loyalty. And so he calls Jesus, my Lord, my God. Verse 29, Jesus said to him, because you have seen me, have you believed? Blessed are those who did not see and yet believed. You see to whom the blessing is addressed? The blessing is addressed to those who haven't seen, like you, like me, like John's readers, the readers of this gospel account. This is addressed to those who receive this blessing, those who have not seen the risen Jesus, and yet will read this and believe. Does that describe you? Verse 30, we have the culmination of this, even though there's going to be another chapter in the Gospel of John. This is really the end of the Gospel account. Therefore, many other signs Jesus also performed in the presence of the disciples. John has described 7 of those miracles earlier in the Gospel, and this was the last one. This was the 8th. On the 8th day, you have the 8th miracle. Verse 31, but these have been written so that you may believe. That's why John is writing. That's why you're reading, so that you can read and that you can hear, and even though you have not seen, that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God. And not only that, and that believing you may have life in his name. If you believe, you will have the life that is described here. Have you believed? If you have, then the life is your current possession.